All right, committee, we will get started. We're going to talk dairy in Kansas, and we have a lot of folks online joining us due to weather and trying to get home, either beat the storm or hopefully not get in the middle of it. But well, yeah, okay. I'm going to face it head on. So, but we do want to, the committee that's able to join us online and those in attendance, you know, this is an issue very important to us, and the timing just to make sure everything fits. That's the way it works, and this will be kind of the start, I believe, of a meaningful conversation on kind of the future of K-State dairy and the research needs assessment that last year the legislature, through the appropriations process, appropriated a couple $100,000, and an RFP was sent out. Aimpoint Research was awarded the study, and they are here today to present their findings. Also, we have dairy farmers, the head of K-State Extension, dairy specialist at K-State, dairy farmers. So once the presentation or that, I mean, the presentation is going to be on the study, but if that has other questions for dairy farmers, again, they were with us a few weeks ago at Rural Caucus, so they are here, I believe, only to show support for the study. Many of us will get a good idea what that is, but also if you have questions on maybe moving forward, I didn't ask them, but they will be available to answer questions. So with that, Danielle Cummings, who is a fusion leader for Aimpoint, is joining us. Danielle, are you on the line?
I am indeed. How's everybody doing today?
Doing well. It's kind of raining, so in Kansas we celebrate that. So, all right, there you are. You have appeared now. If
Just
you
like the Wizard of Oz.
Yes. So if you want to get going, and then do you want us to just take questions at the end? Will that work? Or if we have questions?
Let's do questions at the end.
Okay.
I think it'll be easier just because of the lag and hearing you guys and hearing us. And I think my colleague Ben is having some problems with his hearing things. Ben, why don't you sign off and sign back in and see if that helps? I'm going to chat him that. But we'll be able to get started with the rest of the presentation. I'm going to drive the slides here, so I will share my screen. And I will let my colleague Greg introduce everybody else, if that's okay. Can everybody see my screen? Can everybody see the presentation? Okay, great. So I will turn it over to Greg and we'll get started.
Thank you, Danielle. Chairman Rogers, very nice to see you, sir.
Well, I'm glad, Ambassador, that you're joining us. It means a lot. The committee, Ambassador Dowd is a. You're not that old, so I'm not going to call you an old friend, but a longtime friend. But thank you. So you will know that it rained a little bit, I think, on your farm.
All right. Well, for those of you that don't know me, Greg Dowd from Jewell County, west of Mankato, Kansas. And if you can't tell what my allegiance is, just look over my shoulder there, and that might give you an indication. I don't know if you can see that or not. But,
it must be a power cat. We can't see it, but the slide's up. But
yeah, okay.
I can only imagine.
There is a power cat right over my shoulder, Kent, and that's where it'll stay. And I got to admit, I'm a little nervous after Virginia got knocked off in the tournament here. I hope they're the only ones, and I hope that doesn't happen to us here tomorrow night. That said, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to introduce, you've met Danielle Cummins, who is a fusion leader, and she's from a dairy background up in New York State, and knows that industry quite well up there. Introducing Ben Schooner, who is one of our market research analysts extraordinaire, guru, who did the market research for the work that we did for you, and lastly, but certainly not least, my dear friend and former colleague Dave Jude. Dave has been here in Washington just a little bit longer than I have. He is an excellent agricultural economist, even though he went to Purdue, but he's an Indiana farm boy, and he has been. He and I have known each other for over 25 years, and when we get into projects like this, I've done a lot of these with Dave over the years, and it's always been a pleasure to have him aboard and involved with this. And so with that, I'm going to ask Danielle to kind of get to the next slide here. And we're going to introduce Aimpoint Research just briefly, and then I'm going to turn it over to Dave to talk some of the numbers. For those of you that don't know me, I was a state FFA officer and an AGR and a guy that worked for Senator Roberts back here in Washington, and have been here for a long time, 30 some years, which means sometimes I'm of no value to anyone in the outside world. I understand that, being now you're catching me from South of Annapolis, Maryland today at the horse farm out here. When I left the Trump administration a couple years ago, I joined this firm, Aimpoint Research, and at that time there were 12 of us. Today there are 30 of us, and we do four things at Aimpoint. We do really good market research, and you're going to see some of that today. We do a little bit of consulting, like what we're working on here. What we are very well known for is our wargaming. And that is because three of my colleagues, including the CEO and boss, were classmates at West Point together, and two of them were the two most recent colonels in charge of wargaming at the Army War College. So to do a war game, or to do what we do at Aimpoint, what we really are is an intelligence company. And so we meld and blend and what we call fuse all these things together, whether it's market research and intelligence and prediction. And that's what you're going to see to hear a little bit of all of that today, except for the wargaming and the product that we're going to provide to you. And next slide, Danielle. We do that today. We have about 70 clients across all of agriculture. So all we do is agriculture. And we do a lot of work for the farm credit system and co-ops and the corn and the soybean guys and all kinds of different things in between. And so with that, Danielle, we'll get into the presentation here. And I'm going to turn it over to Dave Jude to walk us through some numbers.
I just want to go over briefly some of the kind of the impact numbers that dairy has in Kansas, kind of answer the question, why dairy? A lot of people may not think of Kansas as a dairy state, but that's not the case, especially over the last couple decades, maybe last 3 decades. Danielle, can you move the next slide? So this is just a wrap-up little graphic of the total economic impact that we kind of identified in this research, and there's more, and I'll get into that as well. But the bottom line in the little blue bar there is Kansas is very well positioned to take advantage of future dairy trends, but it's a fast-moving train, and we have to keep up with it. You can go to the next slide. And I noted when I was reading up a little bit on Kansas State, on their academics and research, not their basketball scouting, but before the season. But they had published in their year-end report an article about dairy, and it was entitled "A New River of Gold." And that is a pretty apt title for the opportunities here for Kansas and dairy. In 2022, when we added up all the raw milk value income to the farm gate, it was over $1 billion. When you take all the data month by month. And then you can see over to the right, the value of feed. That's another $454 plus million. So that's about $1.5 billion of farm level commodity impact that comes from dairy. I'm sorry, there's a screen across my slide, and I was using that for crib notes. I'm going to look over. As I said, that is just kind of the commodity level impact of dairy in Kansas, but there's also the indirect economic multiplier effect. Dairy farms employ workers. They buy and sell cattle for breeding and adding to their herd. They require hauling for the milk. They require insurance. They use energy. They rely on banks, veterinarians, consultants for feed and nutrition. All the crops that get grown to provide dairy feed take fertilizer, chemical input, seed, and all that money and economic activity gets generated uniquely in the rural economy and goes back to mainstream businesses. So this commodity level outlook is just kind of the tip of the iceberg of the economic activity that dairy creates, which is why so many states are pursuing opportunities to expand their dairy industry, which goes back to the point we made in the opening slide about why the time to act is now. Now on to the next slide. But the other thing we just kind of wanted to emphasize is that it's not just the farm level and rural economy that are driven by dairy. The dairy processing and products industry is also a major economic engine. There was a study done in 2021 by the International Dairy Foods Association that looked at all the models. There's a primary model that the federal government uses, mostly to forecast GDP. They use that same model. It's called the M-Plan model to look at the effect of the dairy processing industry nationally and state by state. And in Kansas, what they came up with was it creates over 8,500 direct jobs working in the dairy products and processing industry. That supports about another 19,000 plus jobs of people who serve into and out of those plants. That generates about 1.5 billion in direct economic impact. And when you add up the value chain, it's another 5.6 billion in impact. That's a total overall impact of 7.1 billion, which is about 4% of the gross domestic product of the state. Also, if you take the taxes that the dairy processing industry pays annually, and this doesn't include property tax on farm, taxes before it gets to the plant, nor sales taxes or other things on food after it leaves the plant. That's about 185.5 million annually. Another important thing about dairy is to just understand the trends of where it's going. Globally, the demand for dairy is huge, and in the U.S., it's huge as well. We hear a lot of times over the past, 20 years, that dairy's dying because everybody's drinking almond milk or soy milk or cashew milk or whatever you want to, whatever you can squeeze and call it milk. But that's not the case. The beverage milk is down in consumption. Interestingly, only the low fat milk. High fat milk is actually up, following most other commodities where, new keto diets and things are driving dark meat chicken and the rib over the loin and beef and driving pork prices. But the real thing that's driving dairy demand are the dairy products, the output of the plants that we just mentioned. And the trend is kind of long term. If you look at USDA's latest projection for 10 years out, which is ambitious, but it is the baseline that everybody used, skim solids use will be up about 11.5%, or about 6.5%, and milk fat. Again, like I said, the higher fat products are back in vogue, and that's projected to be up about 11.5%. Exports are up about 9% in the past 5 years, and that trend is kind of baked into the outlook because Europe and New Zealand, two of the two biggest dairy exporters, they're pulling back with a lot of their environmental sustainability and other regulations, and that's going to create a gap in the world, especially in Asia. And Kansas is an export powerhouse already, and that is a role that they can fulfill in dairy. USDA is projecting a lot of the dry milk product exports to increase almost 30% over the next 10 years, and almost all that's going to go to Asia. And just to wrap up, so again, why dairy? Why Kansas? The why dairy is clear, I think, from these numbers. It's a great opportunity with a great potential for a return on investment. But why Kansas? Because there is the opportunity for sustainable growth. A lot of the climate and conditions in parts of Kansas, that's what led in the 1970s to the big expansion in California for dairy. And now that is starting to reverse, and plants and companies are coming back to Kansas. Farmers are coming back to Kansas. The cost of doing business, a business-friendly state, and more so a cattle-friendly state with the beef industry there. And there are, I hate to say this word, and I went through my thesaurus and tried to find something else because it's almost cliche as a consultant to say synergy, but there are synergies between the cattle and the dairy industry. And there's a lot of opportunity for research beyond just dairy into silage and sustainable production for dairy in Kansas. So that's kind of my overview, and I'll pass on the baton.
Well, thank you, Dave. And I'm going to turn it over to Ben here, and we'll do a little summary of market research.
Yes, thank you very much. For this research, we conducted several interviews with dairy farmers in Kansas and some surrounding states, as well as some people who are involved in dairy adjacent industries. So we kind of got their feel about where they see the industry, where they see their operations, and this is what we found. So I'm going to go over a couple main points and then take us through about 9 of these interviews that we did to get their main points. So first of all, the size and shifting of location in Kansas. There's a westward drift of dairy in Kansas. Suburban encroachment and declining infrastructure networks in the east has moved dairy out west, where there's plenty of water, plenty of space, and favorable weather. Another thing that these farmers are mentioning is that there's the dairy market has become bifurcated. So there's the large commodity goods, and there's also value-added, more foodie goods. And there is a desire that Kansas can support both of these, the small operations as well as the larger ones. In terms of the role of universities, there is quite a gamut of perception in terms of the role of the university, but pretty much universally, they say that the unbiased research that is not tied to any one particular company or brand is very important, and it benefits all dairy farmers. If we could get the next slide. In terms of education, hands-on experience is seen as very important by just about everyone, but there's also a call for managerial training and leadership and communication. There's a thought that sometimes these things get glossed over, and especially in terms of business and planning. Business and planning skills is very important in dairy, and while it's important to know how to run a dairy, physically speaking, you also need a lot of planning, and it's a business as well. Feed science and animal health are seen as the most relevant fields of research. Genetics and monitoring technologies are also very important because no matter how automated or unautomated your operation is, you need a steady supply of healthy calves to keep going. In terms of relationships, internships through Kansas State are seen as a pipeline to future talent. Relationships with adjacent industries, such as processing, is seen as another good way to expose potential graduates to a wide variety of careers. So next, we're going to go through these interviews. I have changed the names. These are aliases because they may be easily identified. So first one guy we talked to was Colin. Colin's a farmer he's actually in Iowa, but we were talking to people from all over, and he has experience in banking as well. And a major sentiment of his is the importance of deliberate financial and long-term operational planning. He makes a clear distinction, as I mentioned, between the nuts and bolts dairy skills and business acumen. And he also mentioned that marketing, these guys need to be able to market their product to get the best deal, and lots of times that includes futures, having a good command of contracts, and lots of these guys don't have that coming right out. So he also notes the importance of clearly identifying the educational goals when you establish an educational track. So if they're doing one thing, have the educational track be clearly defined, not just dairy writ large. If we get the next one. So Jake is a small farmer and cheesemaker in eastern Kansas, and he's trying to make it in the value-added market. So he had mentioned said, nice quote, when dairies were going out of business, he realized he needed to get out or get weird. So for him, get weird meant an artisanal cheese operation. And he recognizes the split between those two markets. As I mentioned, he's really hoping that he can make it in the value-added market. He said a lot of that's going to depend on the distribution, some of the external infrastructure that's available to him. And he does mention that the extension service in Kansas State really helped him get up and running when he was in his infancy. And he hopes that they can establish relationships with smaller operations as well as the big ones. We go to David, next one. So David is a processor. He's not a farmer. He notes that managers of processing operations need to have great communication and leadership skills, as well as the operational aptitude. He mentioned that processing involves a lot of hard science and math that he wasn't necessarily aware of when he first got into it. And he thinks that if students were aware of some of this hard science that was involved, they would be more apt to engage in that in a career in dairy. He notes an importance of understanding FDA regulations. He says he'd hire someone, right? If they knew that, he would hire them just to keep up with that. And he believes that exposing students to the world of dairy processing through education and internships would help them understand that there's a lot of career paths out there related to dairy. We can go to the next one. So Brett is a Kansas State alum. He worked on their dairy when he was there. Like others, he's a big advocate of the management and financial skills through university education. He sees extension services as a really huge asset and strategic guidance for dairy farmers. And he mentioned that if you don't use them, if you're a dairy farmer, you're not using them, you're really missing out. He really embraces sustainable development such as manure fiber bedding and cross ventilation. He was very big about new ventilation techniques. Go to the next guy. So Dustin is an equipment dealer in Baldwin City. He doesn't necessarily see the necessity of a college education. He's gotten burnt a few times by guys who seemed really book smart, but then they couldn't run business. Weren't much use to him. But he does see the research as important overall. In terms of the future of Kansas dairy, his main concerns are that the eventual water supply issues are going to come to roost as more of these, there's more and more large dairies out west. And he also notes that the industry itself is shifting to a much more data-driven, world where he said, a guy's sitting looking over spreadsheets in his office as opposed to being out in the barn all day. And he's had a little bit of concern about, how dairy farmers are going to be able to make that transition, if they're going to be able to do that successfully. He also mentioned in terms of research, it'd be great if the universities were a little more collaborative, saying, you work on this, you study this, I'll work on this, instead of trying to, one up each other and along the same lines of research. So I'm not exactly sure how much that happens, but that was his view. We'll go to the next one. Melanie runs a family dairy and processing facility in Junction City. Her product has a local reputation. It's a local brand, and she thinks that brand has helped her gain workers. She has a relationship with Kansas State, employs several former students, and she's extremely engaged with her operation and with her employees. She makes it a point to continually challenge them and engage them and keep raising the bar for them, engaging their curiosity. And she feels that this tact that she has, that way that she handles and keeps pushing keeping her employees engaged, has really allowed them to not suffer the labor issues that lots of other dairies are facing right now. I will go to the next one. James is not a farmer anymore. He farmed for many years, and now he runs the milking booth at the Kansas State Fair. James believes that consumers have become removed from the source of their food, and he's kind of made it his mission to reestablish that connection. He is an advocate of emerging technologies that focus on sustainability. And he, in terms of the expansion of larger operations, he really thinks that larger operations, they have the firepower behind them that they can really make a difference in terms of sustainability because they're so big. He also feels that having a biofuel facility as part of any addition that Kansas State would undergo would really be a great public relations tool. It would say, look, this dairy is powering the whole campus. So he's not a farmer anymore, but he is an advocate. He wants to connect people to their food again, and he wants to promote sustainability. Right, go on to the next one, please. So Alex is a small producer. He specifically notes that, and he's in the East. Where is he? Viola. He notes that the decline of the support structure around him, the urban encroachment that he has to deal with, it's making farming very difficult in his region. And he notes that at some point there's going to be a tipping point, a breaking point, where he's going to need to move out west, and at which point he seeks to double the size of his herd. So I just think that he's a really good example because you talk about large dairies taking over. Well, this is one guy that realizes that he himself will have to go from being a smaller Eastern Kansas dairy farmer to a larger Western Kansas dairy farmer. And he says that that's just the natural progression of things. And he's not sure when it's going to happen, but he knows it's going to happen. Go to our last one, please. So George runs a very large operation in Plains, Kansas. He is strictly business minded. He did not come up as a dairy farmer himself. He worked in extensions. He was all over the place, and his motivation is not to turn a profit, but to take whatever steps necessary to maximize his profit. And he has the backing to do that. He believes that the quality of a university program begins with great faculty who execute great research that trickles down into a robust undergrad program that turns out great undergrads. He feels that degrees should be in animal science with a dairy focus and not just a siloed dairy degree. He acknowledges the importance of a broad-based four-year university education. He believes that teaches you how to learn and equips the future leaders for an ever-changing world. So he's very, broad-based. Learn how. He mentioned to me that you never know what you're going to need to know because everything's always changing. So you need to know how to learn, how to make decisions. So in terms of, he's a big proponent of four-year education. He feels that more narrow technical certifications are very important too, because not everybody is going to be running the dairy. Some people are just going to need to know specific skills. He thinks that those should be provided by more local community colleges as opposed to large universities. So that was it on that's who we talked to. So overall, just to sum up, the dairy industry in Kansas is one where large dairies are getting larger. In terms of education, hands-on experience is a necessity, but there's also room for opportunity when it comes to managerial and business education. Dairy farmers rely on universities to provide relevant, unbiased research, especially in the areas of health and feed science. And in terms of intern opportunities, as well as allied industries, they offer a chance to expose students to a variety of potential careers in dairy. That's it, and I will pass it off to Greg.
Thank you, Ben. Danielle, go to the next slide here. Chairman Rogers, the first thing I would say is that this presentation is based upon the assumption that everybody in the room has read our report. And I realize that may not necessarily be the case. I also would assume that everybody has seen the two-pager that we put together. If not, one of the items on that two-pager is what you see right here. And I will tell you, after reading our report and all the conversations that I had with everybody, Ken, that I can sum it up very quickly. Everybody wants everything when it comes to the dairy industry in Kansas. There isn't any selection in terms of we want research or we want good teachers and good students, or we want to work towards the big guys or the small guys or this or that. The answer is it's all of the above. And so I think this is a slide and something that we provided on the two-pager that kind of indicates what all of those things are. Whether it's on the animal production, animal husbandry side of the equation with breeding and nutrition and health. Certainly mentioned several times was K-State's really important work and work that it does in teaching and research in food science as well as feed science. A lot of conversation about the fact that one of the ways to increase efficiency in dairies in Kansas is the great work that we could do on improving to have more high quality forage. And certainly this is something that Kansas has excelled in and continue to excel in different ways, whether it involves corn or grain, sorghum, or whatever it is. We've talked about the business management side of the equation. The facilities, is changing rapidly, as we all know, whether it's rotary barns or robotics or whatever it is. And then on the research and extension side, a key piece of the conversation as well, and a broad base of different issues. And so I think this is a good illustration of the fact that this is a big and growing industry in Kansas, and one that bears a lot of attention and has a lot of potential. Danielle, you can go to the next slide. Ken, as I sum this up, I'm first of all, I should point out that I actually was on the Kansas State dairy cattle judging team many years ago. And my claim to fame, I guess, Ken, if nobody really knows this, but I was on the famous Charlie Norton's last judging team. And in fact, that year I actually won the Fort Worth dairy cattle judging contest as a part of being on that team. And so I have this conversation is near and dear to my heart. The other thing that I would say is, and I think you've heard my speeches, and when I travel around the country giving speeches about the future of agriculture, I emphasize very firmly that, as Dave Juday indicated, whether if you look 5, 10, 20 years down the road, and that's what we do at Aimpoint Research, the livestock industry isn't going to grow in Asia. It isn't going to grow in China. Beef cattle thing might grow a little bit in Brazil, but not the dairy side of the equation. New Zealand is maxed out, Australia is maxed out, and the Europeans are right in there to a point of shrinking. So the point is this, and it's very simple and straightforward. When you get 5 and 10 years out and looking at the meat supplies, the protein supplies, the animal protein supplies, the dairy supplies around the world, there's really only one place on earth that it can expand, and that's North America. And to me, with dairy, that starts in actually the Central Plains and Southern Plains. And so my charge to you today is let's go. Let's get with the program. Because there is enormous opportunity. We now have expanded processing capabilities in Kansas, and that gives us now an opportunity to expand production. We're actually, we've got expanded processing in Texas as well. And so you've got an opportunity in the same area where we feed cattle to expand now on the dairy side of the equation. A couple of weeks ago, I spoke at the Water Pack meeting in St. John, Kansas. And we were talking about Quivira, but I think a lot of the same things apply in terms of the Ogallala Aquifer and the importance of water in western Kansas now and going forward. And we have to have a plan and manage that and do it well in order to expand what we're doing. I mentioned rail here, and we didn't get into it too much in the report, but, there's this perception that the reason the dairy industry is leaving California is because of not in my backyard and urban issues and environmental issues and inability to do business issues. My conversations have led me to believe that there's actually one really important concern that they have out there in the dairy industry, and that's rail. And it's the inability to get commodities in to these dairies. We actually saw a situation last fall where a large poultry entity in California had to file an emergency ruling with the Surface Transportation Board to enforce the railroad to haul corn to the poultry farm so the birds wouldn't starve to death. This is a real challenge in California in terms of infrastructure and rail. And I think that is one of the huge advantages that Kansas has that we shouldn't look over or take for granted is the reason those things are operating in places like Dodge City and Garden City, Kansas, because you got rail coming each direction and every way in between. That is an enormous advantage that we should play off of in our livestock industry in Kansas. On the Kansas State side of the equation, really interesting comment, and I want to make sure that this isn't taken the wrong way. K-State is known out there as a tremendous research facility, and the work they do in research and agriculture is really outstanding, and that ties together with the animal health corridor and everything else that you're doing in Kansas. But I think what we picked up a little bit is the notion that Kansas State needs to continue to emphasize the teaching side of the equation and cranking out good undergraduates. And I think that going along with that, and Ben mentioned it, is you also pick up that, we want K-State to crank out good 4-year degrees and folks that can come in here and be managers, but we also want to work with folks like Dodge City JUCO and the tech folks out there to build the technical folks and have the technical training and the managers underneath that as well. So I think all of those things from a labor and management standpoint are important. And I think Dave indicated it well, as a lot of the places in the United States, not in my backyard when it comes to livestock, is a really big thing. And I think that is an advantage for Kansas as well, and something that, when you tie the animal health corridor in K-State and NBAF all together, we've got it going on in Kansas, and we need to continue to emphasize that and use that to grow our industry on the livestock side of the equation. And dairy is the opportunities for us to grow the dairy side of the equation for domestic consumption and for export is just absolutely tremendous. Danielle? Let's see what we've got here. I think we've got one more slide. Nope, that concludes it. With that, Ken, I think we're going to open it up and see what you have in terms of questions.
All right, very good. Thank you all so much. I guess, Danielle, if you want to, get out of your slides so we can see your faces as we get the questions there. We saw the power cap briefly. There it is. And the sun is shining in brightly, so that is probably a Coach Snyder looking favorably upon you. I don't know if that is or not, but that glow. Questions for the Aim Point team on the presentation? I guess I'll start. Representative Gardner, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for that informative presentation. I guess my question today would be your thoughts about public policy, particularly as that pertains to the dairy industry and how Kansas stacks up with other states like California or Oregon or New Mexico. What changes or what kind of public policies do you think we need to pursue so that we can grow the dairy industry in Kansas?
Representative Gardner, can I tell you a couple stories right quick, just to kind of get you warmed up when we talk about policy and dairy? And the first is that I was actually Senator Roberts' dairy guy on the Senate Ag Committee for 3 weeks before we shuffled portfolios a little bit, and I have to tell you, that was one of the best days that I ever had in Washington, because dairy policy is one of the most convoluted and difficult things you can possibly imagine. My first meeting with my boss at USTR, Robert Lighthizer, one of the first questions he asked in one of our first meetings was, how does the U.S. dairy farmer get paid? And I want you to know, sir, that was probably the most difficult question and answer that I have ever faced in my 30 years in Washington. We came back the next day to Bob with a 3-page bullet point answer of the answer to that question. That said, I want you to know that Senator Leahy from Vermont is retired after 40 years on the Senate Agriculture Committee, and Colin Peterson from the House Ag Committee, Minnesota, is also retired. And what I anticipate in Washington coming up here in terms of dairy policy is change. I don't know how much change. I don't know how significant the changes will be. All I can tell you is I'm pretty confident that there are going to be changes to U.S. dairy policy and how things get priced and what make allowances look like and how all this is. I know the industry has been working on this for a year to try to sort this out and reach a consensus. And so I think you're asking exactly the right question. And I think in the coming weeks and months here, we're gonna see something new and different, and I'm not sure exactly what it's going to be.
Very good. Anything else? Okay. Other questions?
Thank you very much.
What about, there's a lot of things in that report, and I believe, have we released the full report to everybody?
The slide report?
No, the full report. Kelsey, do you know?
I have not checked to the full committee. I passed it to you.
Yes.
But I think there's no reason.
Right, that's fine. And we didn't want to get way out ahead, so I don't know if we did that. And that's fine. No, that's fine. Probably you shared it with me, and I was supposed to share it with everybody. That's probably, so you'll have it. I do have it in an email. Yes. Yes. But we have that. You don't have the 2-page. Okay. Okay. But the presentation that we have here has been made. Anyway, sorry about the bookkeeping, folks and Greg. In all this research, did you look at consumer perceptions or other perceptions of dairy in Kansas? Or was it, just kind of, what did you all hit?
I don't, Danielle, back me up here, but I don't think that was part of the scope of what we were asked to do, Mr. Chairman. I think a lot of this was the future of the industry and in particular as it related to Kansas State and Extension.
Well, then I will rephrase my question. What of the data surprised you that as you were compiling this for presentation?
That's a really good question. I think what surprised me is the notion that there wasn't anything in particular that folks wanted. Ken, they wanted everything, and there was not a particular emphasis or saying that anything that anybody was doing was in the wrong direction, or we need to emphasize more of this or less of this. I think it was just a re-emphasis about the fact that this industry is growing and we really need to invest in it from the state of Kansas and Kansas State's standpoint. One of the things that I think part of the conversation is here, Ken, is I used to work at the K-State Hog Barn many years ago when I went to school there, and in large part those facilities are the same as what they were when they were built in the late 1970s. They've been updated several times. I understand that, and they're still relevant. But one of these days there's probably going to be a need for some significant investment in that conversation, and I think what we heard loud and clear is in the case of dairy, that is certainly warranted. One of the tidbits that I picked up, though, that is kind of interesting is it's challenging for a university in particular to have a dairy because by federal law, a university or a prison dairy are not eligible for USDA risk management payments. And so if you've got a dairy in the case of Iowa State that's 400 cows, that dairy, in my understanding, actually loses money because it can't compete with the commercial dairies that do get those payments. And I think that's something to consider for all of us as we go forward and take a look at those kinds of investments. Is certainly everybody believes that K-State needs to have a dairy farm and a dairy program, and the fact that you need to figure out a way to do it in a way that can teach undergraduates in a way that they are directly able to go into a commercial operation and have not only the research component side of the equation, but the hands-on side of the equation as well. And I will tell you, I'm not sure anybody had any real exact opinion on what that ought to look like, because things are changing.
So, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Yeah, with your indulgence, I apologize. I'm not nimble enough to hit my unmute button when it was time, but I wanted to go back to a couple questions. One of yours, when you asked about the consumer perception, as Danielle and Greg, averred, that wasn't a component of this, but I think in the overview of some of the stuff that I've presented on the demand for dairy, you can read between the lines and see that fat is cool and protein is a big demand. And it is the innovation of new dairy products. It's not just, people eat breakfast at McDonald's through the drive-through now. They don't have a bowl of cereal in the morning. milk. There's so many other beverage options out there. So all the innovation in dairy products and the demand for cheese kind of turns on the end a lot of the old thinking about dairy. We need to produce low fat milk, and we need to do this, we need to do that. But that is all changed, and the opportunity is for innovation in products, which means using fat, using protein in different ways. And then to Representative Gardner, I agree with Greg on the federal policy, which really drives milk pricing. But at the state level, again, a little outside of the scope of this, I have worked on a dairy processing recruitment strategy for another state and talked to a lot of dairy company executives from all the household names that you would recognize. And the bottom line is, it's surprising the policy because of the federal marketing orders and the way that the pricing is set up, which I once tried to explain to a Japanese buyer one time that might have been even harder than Ambassador Lighthizer trying to explain that to a second language. But all the policy innovations innovations, changes, reforms, regulations, insights that the dairy executives talk about are things that aren't related to dairy. They're how do you make, instead of a mandate like California that you have to make biogas and energy from the dairy farm, what are the incentives and what are the streamlining things that you can do to let dairy generated electricity plug into the grid? The transportation policies about weight variances and waivers, local and regional zoning and how the state addresses that, and then frankly their top things are employment policy, taxes, and other just business cost of doing business items. These companies grew large and do well by knowing how to buy milk and how to make products and resell them. They want to locate in a state that has a good business environment, and that's kind of, I remember being kind of surprised. Their main thing was, we have the dairy under control. We need the policies that support the business environment.
All right, very good. Other questions? Representative Minix.
I guess anybody can, thank you, Mr. Chairman, anybody can address this. I'm seeing in agricultural quite a move away from producing just raw commodities. In the dairy industry, one out west that I'm aware of produces milk specifically for a yogurt company, and they spin off 60-80% of the water, and they send the condensed milk down, and it has to be from non-GMO feeds. To me, that's kind of like a niche market, but I'm seeing, even in wheat and corn and other things, more specialties out there, and I think that's enhanced the income coming back to some of these dairies. If I was a dairy that was worried about marketing on a commodity basis, I think I'd enter into a long-term contract with a company like that basically did the marketing, and I could concentrate on the milk production. Do you see a trend going that way?
I'll answer this and let Dave answer this, and Danielle as well. We see a lot of different things, but I will tell you, last summer, Danielle, we conducted a war game with a entity in the U.S. and these were producers in a cooperative trying to decide whether they wanted to build their own processing, buy their processing, or separate the entity. And I think what we're seeing in dairy is as you're kind of alluding to, a much closer relationship, if just not outright ownership of the processing by the producers or the producer co-op. And so you're seeing a lot more alignment and value added and vertical integration in the dairy industry with regard to the relationship between the producer and the processor.
And I guess I'll add to that just for a moment. Some of the other research that we do for a consumer check or for a checkoff based on consumer responses, people want things that are close to the farm. They want that local product. And I think to say that the entire market would have to shift to that business model is short-sighted. Something that we believe here in Aimpoint is that food security is national security. So I think it needs to be a model that incorporates all of it. You know, you have to have the larger producers to be able to do things and the larger processors and sort of the historically accurate business models. But I think that the innovation that comes from a state that incorporates and encourages business and gives them the flexibility to do that and makes the space for them is important. And I'll go back to a question that you somebody had asked earlier about something you learned that was different and surprising in this study. I'm from New York. I'm very familiar with the dairy industry here. It shocked me to see how varied the size of dairy farms were in Kansas and how exponentially quickly the large ones are getting larger. I think there's real opportunity for you all to embrace that and find ways to encourage those that want to grow, but also reinforce those that have a smaller herd size. For this exact point, you know, consumers want all different options. So there's an opportunity here to be able to service that market in multiple ways.
Yeah, if I could add just real quick, that exact thing came out in one of the interviews where he said, you know, I'm going to need to be able to narrow down, you know, the content, the protein content, what exactly I'm getting from every cow, because I need to differentiate myself because I can't expand. I can't reach that level of size wise. So I've got to be able to hone in on some of these niche markets for this specialized product. So.
All right, thank you very much.
Other questions? I know I said we're going to open up to others. I would like to have Dr. Hadley and Dr. Brook. I'm not sure if either one or both could answer. So I guess the first, and if the Aimpoint folks can stay on the line, we'll try to wrap this up pretty quickly, but I want to, you know, kind of put a broad over this. So Dr. Hadley, Director, you can say who you are when you answer the question for the record. So with this, how did K-State receive this report?
All right, thank you very much for having me speak here. And I am Greg Hadley, and I'm Director for Extension with Kansas State University. How did we receive the report? I'm assuming you mean about how we felt about the report? Yes. And so, you know, it is great to have a very supportive dairy industry that looks at our campus facilities and our teaching facilities and research facilities and realize that we need to have some upgrades in the future. And so, as far as receiving the report, we were very pleased. We've been looking to modernize the dairy for quite some time. And Dr. Brook, would you agree?
Yes, I would. I would, you know, I may add to that is sometimes I refer to this as we're dealing with a facility that's over 45 years old. So think about the classroom you sat in 45 years ago, wherever you were at in the education system, and how the technology has changed to a modern classroom today. We, you know, have a real need if we're going to continue to do teaching that's effective among students that are largely from urban areas that have never been on farms. This dairy is their first impression of agriculture many times, but particularly of the dairy industry. So having something that represents a modern operation and what would be industry standard is very, very important.
I got one more for you, Dr. Brook. Dr. Mike Brook, B-R-O-U-K, correct?
Yeah, B-R-O-U-K,
yes.
correct.
Dairy specialist, K-State. Let's just make sure we got our notes correct. And probably either or, but answer that. The one thing that kept popping in my mind was that, you see the small need to get bigger, the bigger get bigger. How can K-State try to meet, because there's so many needs out there, so how can K-State moving forward, work with those maybe smaller, what we might consider traditional dairies, to those larger ones, like some of those out west that are producing milk for specific reasons? Where's the role of extension? Where's the role of a land grant in trying to? I guess, Dr. Brook first, or whoever wants to start first. How can that work? I mean, we've got extension, we've got places around the state. So, and you and I've had that conversation, but I know y'all weren't prepared. So I'm just, that what jumped out from me from what I saw from this. So how what role can K-State play in the variety of size of dairies we have in the state? So whoever wants to start first.
So K-State Research and Extension will service all ends of the dairy spectrum. I would say right now the current facilities that we have don't necessarily do a very good job with either the large dairies or the smaller, more niche-driven dairy farms as well. However, within that, we do work with both sides of the dairy industry, and also in the dairy processing industry, and we have specialists there to serve. But what Dr. Brook said earlier about the fact that they have done a wonderful job working with the facilities they have. Their dairy production levels are really high. We have retrofitted to the point to where we can with our dairy facilities. But to really do the industry a justice in the future, we definitely need to upgrade soon, because you can only retrofit so much.
So I'll speak directly to, I guess, the impact of the extension on our dairy farms across the state. So I've been a part of our dairy extension team I'm in my 25th year. And so I've lived this expansion that we've seen in this industry. And when I came to K-State 25 years ago, one of the things that we were handed to us as a dairy team within extension was this idea that we needed to try to help rebuild the dairy industry in the state. And so we came alongside communities, we came alongside dairy producers, we came alongside the Department of Ag when visitors would come that were interested in coming and establishing a dairy farm here in the state. And we worked very closely with all producers, regardless of size. And some of the innovations that we have worked with are in the area of heat stress abatement. And many of those things that we have researched and developed, actually they're size neutral. They apply to all dairy farms regardless of size. And the work that I do today in the area of robotics, the methods are different, whether it be for a smaller farm than a large farm, but it's still in the area of adopting technology on farms that will help them compete in the business environment they're in. So we work very closely with all sizes of farms. It's really many times size neutral.
Thank you, Representative White.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You just kind of answered my question. I mean, I think pushing the envelope right now on dairies is size, and how can any institution research that? And like you said, if you just have a little bit of robots, a little bit of whatever to help the big guys that are wanting to double and triple their size, that will be difficult. Is there a budget you guys are constrained to on your thinking about building a new research facility, if that's the correct terminology?
We've had discussions about a budget for the new facility, but those aren't state architecturally approved yet, and so we couldn't say anything about that until that time.
And what kind of time frame are we looking at? Is that a fair question?
It is a fair question. I would say that with the industry pushing it forward, it's going to come up in the near future. Of course, this report came out in February, and so we're just not prepared to say it at this time. I'm sorry.
Well, I understand, and we're talking, every education, every university would love to have an open checkbook because they can use it. So I appreciate the answer, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Very good. Okay. Thank you. I think we're done for now. And again, thank you for being good sports. I know this has just kind of come out, and I'm sure we'll have more discussions on this. But again, thank you for being here. Before we wrap up, the dairy industry is also here. Any comment, any word on how you all received this report? What your perceptions are. Janet Bailey, now she's the CEO of Kansas Dairy.
Yep, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I am Janet Bailey. I'm the CEO of Kansas Dairy, both the Kansas Dairy Association, Unified for a Voice for Dairy Producers across the state, Kansas Dairy Commission, that is your state voluntary dairy checkoff. We do have a pledge toward building the K-State Dairy. My dairy farmers, more than a decade ago, did pass a board resolution to support rebuilding the K-State Dairy. So this has been a priority for us for more than a decade, recognizing that this needed to be done. So I will tell you, with your support, having appropriated the funds for this study to be completed in last year's legislative session. As we look at this report that has come forward, we would like to convey our gratitude. We'd like to also thank Aimpoint. We feel that the methodology, the scope of work has been instructional, not only, I believe, toward what we would ask the legislature to do to support a new dairy at Kansas State University, but I will assure you that we as the industry trade group for Kansas dairy farmers take this information, and it will also inform us in our strategic planning. So we respond very favorably and thank the legislature for the investment that has produced this report. I would acknowledge I do have 3 dairy farmers with me today. I have Mr. Dave Lane from Colwich. I have Miss Maggie Gillis from Valley Center. And then I believe that Mr. Steve Strickler is outside with Luke Gillis, who is our next generation dairy farmer. And ultimately, Luke is why we're doing what we do.
All right, very good. Ms. Olson, anything from the Department of Agriculture? I know you weren't planning on doing anything, and again, off the cuff, but you were the ones that kind of started this process. That's fine. That's fine. And that was really for today. So Ambassador Dowd, Greg, I guess I can call you that, right? But and your team, thank you so much for doing this today. I know you all have busy schedules and the way it worked, and your work is good, as very good, that is, as always. And I did look at the clock. I wasn't even paying attention. You all are on overtime, so it is late in the East Coast. So.
Well, Mr. Chairman, it's a pleasure to see you, and thank you for giving us this opportunity on behalf of the state of Kansas and K-State. And this is a topic that is, at least for me personally, very near and dear to my heart. And we would love to see continued growth and expansion across Kansas and the dairy sector. I don't think there's any better place on earth than Kansas to do this, and so let's get after it.
Very good. Thank you very much. So with that, we thank Aimpoint, and what Terry was handing out is just some other information from Kansas Dairy and for your to maybe put in a file as we look at moving forward. This will be shared with other members of the legislature as well, and I'm sure this topic will continue on into the next session. So just a reminder, we will not be meeting until Wednesday of next week, the 22nd. We'll have 2 bill hearings, and also we will have our last real caucus also, right, of this session come up on Tuesday about the College of Osteopathic Medicine in Wichita and what.
The last one is.
Oh, that's right. No, that's right. So this is the second to the last one. The last one is Dr. Ernie Minton, the Dean of the College of Agriculture. I'll be talking a little dairy as well, I think, on that day, and whatever else is going on, exciting things at K-State. So with that, have a great weekend. To go Cats, and we are adjourned.